and welcome back to another live recording of the Public Speaking Expert podcast. My name is Elliot Kay, and I will be hosting the next few minutes, interviewing an incredible topic and an incredible person whose experience and background is wide and varied, and it's very interesting. Anything from designing websites to writing plays to telling stories. And today we're focusing on how to use stories for influence. But before that, let me just remind every single one of you that we are here every single week. We release a new episode every single week, and some of you might be tuning in wondering, where is my part? It's still early enough in season 2 to let you know that Jose has stepped back from the season. He's spread his wings and he's flying elsewhere. And I'm like a phoenix staying on course. But of course, we'll miss him and we wish him all the best in the world. So it is me, Elliot Kay, leading the Public Speaking Expert podcast. And this season, we're focusing on influence, how to be more influential generally. So yes, I will always approach it from a speaking point of view, but my guests and my themes are all going to be about how to be influential, because when we're influential, we have an impact, a greater impact. We're able to influence people's minds, hearts, souls. We can influence industries, and there's various ways to do it. And I really wanted to explore the notion of influence this season, which is why today we're going to talk about how to use stories to influence. And with me I have Neil. So Neil, first of all, welcome. And Neil's kind of my neighbor. You're probably the most neighborly person I've had on this podcast, 20 minutes down the road from me here in Devon. But first things first, how are you doing today, Neil? And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh man, when people ask me that question, I never quite know where to start, because it's from birth to now is quite a
well, that's a
story.
very long answer. I'll assume. I mean, you could have a very boring life, but I don't think that's the case.
How long have you got? I mean, if it's a 3-hour podcast, I could do all of it. I suppose I'm originally I was a graphic designer 10, 12 years ago. I went to see a short play competition at a theatre. And I'd always wanted to write for theatre, and I saw this short play, and I thought I could do that. And the next year, I went back with my play, and I won a competition.
Wow!
And then from that point, I mean, it's a wild story in that I was then commissioned to write 2 plays, for which I received Guardian reviews, and then I got an agent in London, and everything sort of spiraled then into this sudden sort of writing career. So
Wow!
yeah, and now here I am, sort of, I don't know, 12 years later. Still writing, but yeah, I suppose it was me sort of finding what was ultimately what I feel like it was what I was meant to do, but it took a while to get there.
Wow! So it's almost like by accident, but not by accident.
Yeah, in some respects. Yeah, it was I've always been one of these people who, I think if I want to do something, I just set out to do it. And if I don't know how to do it, I'll find a way to do it. I'll read, I'll find YouTube tutorials or whatever it is. Very much a yes person. If somebody asks me if I can do something, I think I could probably do it, but I've never done it before, then I'll say yes, and then I'll find out how.
Oh, amazing. So could you give me £1 million, please?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, there we go. It's live on air.
It's committed. Now this is a verbal contract. This as well.
That's it. I've got you. Yeah. Awesome. I love that. Now, of course,
that's the rest of my life now. Just sort of working towards that aim.
Just giving me £1 million. Well, it's a fantastic journey. I mean, I remember, because in a way, I suppose I ended up a speaker by mistake. I went to a seminar. I saw this guy on stage. I can do that, and I started to pursue this path, which has led me to where I am now, to building the businesses I've built. And so in a way, we saw something that influenced our decision to then pursue a path. You wanted to enter the competition. I wanted to, have, generally stand on stage and impact people. So it's quite interesting how accidents aren't really accidents, or, and again, it gets to us something deep inside. So for you, when you went to that competition, or what did it wake up inside you? What was that thing? What was that spark it started?
I think what it was, I mean, I go back to sort of what you were saying about influence. And I think I see people influence in a more, I suppose, in a more obvious way, to stand in front of people and be an influencer. But what I saw in being in the audience was audiences' minds influenced, people motivated and inspired by the things that were playing out on stage. And I thought, if I could tell a story, if there's something I believe, if there's a message I'd like to get across, then this seems like a great forum to be able to do it. And also to be sort of in the background while I'm saying it. So I'm influencing through the mouths of others as well.
Yeah, which can be both exhilarating and exhausting, I suppose, especially if you
Absolutely.
have a vision for something and they're not quite delivering that, which is why directors, producers, and go a bit crazy because whoever's
Yeah.
mouth is coming to it's like, it's not quite that. It's I need it to be
I
more
think that's
this.
something, yeah, I think you have to learn. It's something I've learned through the process is um, not to sort of to rest the control freakery every now and again, um, and just trust the process. Trust that other people's interpretation of your words are just different, but that they might not be what you intended, but they're just different, and they still land with the audience in a different way.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So you went on this 12-year journey. So you're established writer now. You got an agent.
Yep.
I mean, is there anything we might have heard of that you'd like to share? Feel free to show off. Basically, is what I'm saying.
I suppose. I mean, most recently, I won an Off West End award for a play called Breathe,
Okay.
which is available on YouTube. So if you to search for Breathe, my name Neil Beber on YouTube, you'd find that. Um, and it was unfortunately it was an Off West End award. I'd never won anything like that. I'd never been nominated for anything like that. But it was during those dreaded times of COVID where nobody was in a space anymore. So I got to have an online award ceremony, but
Uh-huh.
unfortunately didn't get to be in a room with a bow tie and have my name read out and make it onto the stage. Unfortunately, I should have done that. Now we could have recreated that moment if I'd known.
Yeah,
I'd have dressed. We could have. You
I
could
could have
have.
announced you.
Yeah, done a
You
virtual
know.
sort of handover an award.
Oh, well, I guess there's hopefully more to come then. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and also I think through how we sort of got in touch through the short stories for stressed grown-ups
Yeah, yeah. And I want
during
to
the.
explore that.
Yeah,
I want to
of
explore
course.
that a little bit. So tell us first of all, let's go wide with this before we narrow it down.
Okay.
So someone that as a playwright, stories is I guess at the heart of pretty much everything you do, unless you write something that's so abstract, so weird. It
Yep.
might not be weird, but you know what I mean.
That
You
is
know,
weird.
is weird. Okay, well that I can nor confirm nor deny such accusations. But unless you write something that has no coherency, no fluidity,
Yeah.
number one, why are stories so impactful in terms of influence from your perspective? Why do stories have such an impact on us?
I think a lot of with the short stories, particularly, they sort
Hmm.
of tap into nostalgia and the power of nostalgia, the ability of nostalgia to put people back in a place where they were happy or contented or something that's familiar and feels safe to them.
Hmm.
And I think putting people in those positions can make them feel probably they're more likely to be receptive to, um, I suppose, what the intention is to relaxation, to calm. My plays are very different, actually. My plays are sort of quite the opposite. They prompt, provoke people to react. They
Hmm.
might shock people. They might amaze people. They might confuse people. But again, all of those sort of notions encourage people to think, to process information, to force people to think of what their opinion to a certain situation might be. You might present something political, and then that makes an audience consider what their position is on those politics.
Yeah,
And then they might go, I
comedians
love the
do
idea.
that.
Sorry?
I think comedians also do that really well.
Absolutely, yeah. And I
Some
love the
comedians.
idea of, I love the idea of writing something that friends go home on the way home, they talk about it. Couples go home in the car, friends go home on the way and on the way home and argue about it, about what
Yeah,
they thought. So it's always prompting, provoking debate, really.
I love that. And I just wonder something I want to, when you put it out there, if we're dealing with someone that's stressed, right, with your podcast
Yeah,
short story for the stressed adult, which was the why you and me are here, really.
yeah, yeah, sure.
Now obviously you have this extensive past, which is even more fascinating, made you more interesting. Not You're very interesting to begin with. Is there a danger if we take people to nostalgia that it
Yeah.
can magnify what's missing?
Um, I don't think so. I think there's an element I think of sometimes if I mean for me personally, I think of my past And I remember, although there were times when I used to enjoy the simple things like trying to um, imagine what I could see in a cloud formation. You know, if I could see a unicorn with a hat on, or if I was, or the peaceful tranquility of picking blackberries as a teenager, or something like that. And then I think to where I've come now, and I'm sort of proud of the journey, in spite of its ups and downs and the the roller coasters that we all go on.
Yeah.
That I've reached this point in my life where I'm still thriving, um, and there's still so much more to learn. And I think that these stories hopefully put people in those positions where they can think nostalgically, but also sort of think about themselves. It gives them perspective, maybe, to think about what they've achieved since.
Okay. And I guess that all depends on how we tell a story, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
the use and the tonation and everything like that
yeah,
will have a massive impact. Because I know sometimes I look back nostalgically, like, oh yeah, God, that was amazing. And then if I'm in the wrong state of mind, I can look back, and go, oh, that's missing. Oh, why don't I
yeah,
have that anymore? Which is
yeah,
why I thought I'd ask that question, because especially if you're targeting the stressed adult. Now it's interesting because I don't get stressed very often. Like
yeah,
I live in a stressful world, and running a business is stressful. But to feel stressed, I don't feel stressed very. Sometimes I get anxiety, which is a form of stress.
mhm,
And one morning last week was the first time I felt really stressed. I had the kids on my own. My wife was in Thailand. I had them for 10 days, and it was just one morning where things happened sequentially that disrupted the whole morning. So getting out the door was stressful. And if I mean that's not a state I'm familiar with. So for me to WhatsApp my wife and go, that was stressful. She's like, oh, what you like? What happened? Like
yeah,
she did something, but it's something simple. Like my son's 2 years old. He did his thing in his pants, and then my daughter suddenly tells me it's not uniform day, and it's really nothing big. But I have a certain
yeah,
time we have to leave by. So all these things, and I was like, oh my god. So if I'm continuously in that state,
yeah,
does the story then? I mean, I'm not, but I'm asking as someone who is, or
yeah.
some of the listeners might be, and especially now with the uncertainty, would you say then that the stories will? Is it deflective? Is it just takes me out of reality for a while, or does it offer me comfort to where I am to
Yeah.
de-stress, or is it all of the above?
Well, I think I call them mini brain escapes.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I think that's sort of what they are really. And what they give you also is the opportunity to reflect. So when the situation you were describing there, and often in day to day life, if we're online and we see social media, if we're out in the world and we see angry people shouting at each other, if we turn on the news and there's more to stress
Right.
about, all of those things obviously contribute, and then we have that low level stress throughout our lives. Really, those influences, and what these stories do, they're escapists to the point of suddenly just dulling all of that noise and giving you that quiet moment of contemplation, so that you also have a moment to reflect. It gives you an excuse to take 10 minutes. I always recommend to people put headphones on, find a quiet place that's their little sanctuary, if you like, and take 10 minutes. I mean, some of my friends, in fact, have said, and I don't take it personally, that they've struggled to make it through to 10 minutes because they're asleep within 5 or 6.
That's a good
Uh,
thing, right?
exactly. Yeah. I mean, in knowing that, I'm knowing that their brain is got to a point where they've become so relaxed, so contemplative that they've actually just drifted off. Um, Especially if people are able to do that in the middle of the day, that in itself is, I think, a massive compliment.
Come with like, please don't listen while driving.
I have, through social media, I've actually said, don't listen to while driving or operating heavy machinery. I hate the idea. Yeah,
Yeah,
hopefully
because
there'll be no lawsuits. Yeah, well, somebody gets crushed in a machine or something through listening to the stories.
right, and that could be a scary thought. So for you, I mean, two questions. One, if you're happy to share, like, what's your formula? How do you kind of, and how much pressure does that put on you to continuously churn out these, or is that part of the buzz? These
Yeah, I
short
think.
stories.
Yeah, well, they started. The origins of them were in the very very first one I wrote. It happened during the. I don't know if you remember the long dark winter lockdown. where the days were very short and the nights were long, and
Yeah.
nobody could see each other. And a couple of my friends called me, and they were in all sorts of trouble, saying they couldn't sleep and they couldn't relax and really struggling. So I wrote a short story with the idea of getting a professional actor to narrate it, get a
Hmm.
production company to produce it, and just put it out into the world and see what happened. And a friend of mine, a producer friend of mine, said, "Well, you've got a reasonably interesting voice. Why don't you record it? And you know what you're doing in terms of production. Why don't you just add the music and the sound effects and put one out and see what happens?" And that's exactly what I did. Because I'm a graphic designer, I was able to package it. I put it out. I told my friends the story was online and that it existed. And I had immediately really, really good feedback. So from that point on, it almost became a dutiful thing in some respects, I suppose, because I felt they
Yeah.
were working, that I wanted to continue to have that effect and give people a choice of different things to listen to put them in that state.
So you someone that has like a formula and a structure and like that's what I followed? You just kind of download your stories. Where do they come from?
It starts with a minute or a minute and a half of meditation. Really, I just get people to just think about where they are, to take a moment. It starts very quietly. I encourage people to breathe and to follow me in terms of their breath, because I think breathing is very important.
Hmm.
And then the stories slowly build, but they're delivered in such a way that um, there are no real sort of peaks. It wouldn't be like this conversation we were having, because if we were to have this conversation and say to people, see if you could go to sleep, there are too
No.
many peaks and troughs.
Yeah.
So it's delivered in this sort of reassuring, everything's going to be fine, you've got nothing to worry about, that sort of delivery. Um, and they slowly just build. I mean, there are stories there about loss as well. There's a story about a woman who's lost her husband and decides to scale a mountain that they decided to scale together, but she, having lost him, decides to scale that mountain on her own. And that in itself, you'd think, how is that going to help people sleep? The idea of loss, how would that help someone? But there's a resolution at the end of it, because in spite of the loss that she's experienced, by achieving that top of the mountain view, she's done something for both of them. There's a resolution, and there's a good to come out of it. So all of the stories, they're always left with, I suppose, not necessarily a happy ending, but a comforting ending. So if you do make it to the end of 10 minutes, you can feel comforted as you drift away.
Right. And do you know the ending before you start?
No, no, and that's one of the beauties of writing,
Yeah.
and I think and why I still love it, because you do get to a point where, certainly if you're writing dialogue, and definitely with these stories, where they take you on a journey. I feel like I'm the first person to experience this journey, and all I'm doing is then sharing that journey with everyone else, with an audience.
Hmm.
But they'll take you on twists and turns, yeah, that you least expect. It's your I think our unconscious minds are amazing.
Amazing. In
Yeah,
so many ways. Amazingly,
yeah,
sometimes horrible, but they're
yeah,
amazingly good
yeah,
as well. Yeah,
absolutely, yeah.
absolutely. So, how can people use stories more to influence or to impact? Don't have to narrow it down for speaking, but generally in their lives. I mean, what would you suggest to all our listeners? I mean, a lot of the majority are speaking or want to be speakers, but generally speaking, we don't have to restrict it.
Yeah.
How can we use more stories to for influence? What would you say?
I think if you were talking with a business application, or if you were talking in networking, um, and you were somebody who wasn't particularly used to sort of public speaking or one-to-one speaking in a business environment, think about the things in your life, the stories that you have to tell, the interesting things that have happened in your life, the fun stories, the shock stories, the being chased through the streets when you were traveling sort of stories, and practice those to make them concise anecdotes. Because what I find is really, really interesting is that if you meet someone who's been traveling, or you meet someone who's really into literature, or you meet someone who loves film, I think that the most sure way to influence someone is to find common ground.
Uh huh.
And it's just thinking about all of those highlights, those peaks, those stories you have in your life, and practice those anecdotes, that beginning, middle, and end to storytelling about your life. There's things to share. And people will remember you. You'll be the guy who was chased through Rome by an angry mob or whatever it might be.
If you're chased through Rome by an angry mob, I wonder what you've done. But there you go. There's a story, right? Is that based on personal experience, Neil?
We'll save that one for another time.
So that's a yes then. I can nor confirm nor deny, right? Such accusations. Okay, that's interesting. Fine common ground. Now, do you feel people don't tell enough stories because they fear they're not very good storytellers?
I've met people who have a really, really interesting story to tell, and they'll get halfway through and suddenly become very self-conscious, and then either end the story or they'll just drift or become monotonous because they're afraid that what they're saying won't be of interest. So maybe that sort of idea of not being self-conscious, belief that the story you are about to tell is an interesting story.
Yep.
Because a lot of communication, a lot of influence, as you were talking about, comes from confidence, really. I think if you're confident, if you deliver a story confidently, if you talk about your skills confidently, then you'll inspire and engage others.
Yeah. And this is, again, when people say, just have that belief. I mean, for someone that doesn't believe, would you have a tip to dial up the belief in storytelling? Intellectually, we get it, right? Just have more confidence, believe in yourself, just know you're a great storyteller. But is there any steps you've got towards actually dialing that up a bit?
What, into making your stories more interesting?
Even sometimes having the guts to share your story, because I know that's a big thing for people.
Yeah, I think it is. You might have a good friend who you can share a story with. I mean, I don't know how likely people are to communicate with friends about their vulnerabilities, but you might say to somebody, I've got these stories, and every time I get halfway through telling a story, I just drift and I become really self-conscious about it. Can I tell you a story? And your friends, if you have good friends who are willing to give you constructive feedback, they might say, actually, yeah, that bit in the middle, that, or you rambled at the end, or the build-up took too long. I think we've all been in those situations where we've met interesting people who have interesting stories, but the way they tell those stories just aren't really particularly engaging. So it's not them, it's just the way they're telling the story.
Yeah. So I guess a big part of it is practice and almost being a bit brave and go, look, I want to really improve this.
Yeah.
Could you give me feedback? And I think that's where people also are a bit like, I don't want feedback because then someone's going to tell me I'm crap, right? But, I guess if your friends aren't going to hold you to high standards and they're not able to be honest with you and they're just going, no, that was great, when it's terrible, then you need better friends, right?
Yeah. I think as a writer, writers can have very thin shells, can be perceived as being very fragile. But most of what I've learned is being through what I've been doing wrong and through people telling me what I'm doing wrong. And sometimes it's just a difference of opinion. But if there's a consensus that what you're doing is wrong, the story is wrong, the sentence doesn't make sense, then you should always listen to that, really. And I think we don't get wise from just doing everything right and going through life being right all the time. We get wise from the things we mess up and the mistakes we make.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's having that maturity or willingness, right, to go, well, this is just feedback, right? This is going to help me. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I ended up in an investor meeting. I've just launched another company where we're going to buy companies.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize it was an investor meeting until I was halfway through in the meeting. And suddenly he's asking all these questions. And I was like, oh my God, we are currently in an investor meeting.
Yeah.
But he knew me. So when I was like, oh, I don't have that, he's like, never admit that. And he almost ripped me another one in a nice way. And he said, had I not known you, I would have stopped the meeting by now and kicked you out.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay. So instead of going, oh my God, and getting defensive, I just sat there and listened and just took a note of everything he was saying. And went to me, he goes, you can expect to burn 15 meetings when you're raising investment. I'm your first one. I was like,
right, okay.
I'm like, I hope I haven't burned you. He went, Not yet, but you're very close. I was like, ah, okay. So now that just made me then literally, I got back, I picked up the phone to my CFO. I was like, listen, just had this meeting. Here's what he suggested.
Yeah,
Then we had this whole meeting about how to structure the pitch deck and improve things. So,
yeah.
excuse me, I'm just recovering from a cold. So it could
No,
have gone one or two ways, right? I could have gone all defensive, like, oh my God. I mean, this is a
yeah,
guy that sold his business for 6 million, and then that business got sold 6 months later and made 30 million
wow.
without doing much else because he
Yeah,
had a sell-on clause. So I think he really knows his stuff when it comes down to things.
yeah,
And I think what happens is too many of us are too sensitive to feedback.
yeah. I agree.
And so we lock ourselves up. And I guess, as a writer, I mean, I've written 6 books. I don't know how good they are. But I know the effort that goes in. And so if someone comes at me and I've, again, like you have let go of the control, I've let go of that, I just take his feedback.
Yeah,
But if you've invested all these hours in something and someone goes, oh, that's crap, I can understand why that's so disheartening.
yeah,
So I get why people don't do it. But like you say, that's how we learn. That's how we grow.
yeah,
That's how we tweak. I mean,
yeah,
I don't know. I'm sure Star Wars wasn't written in one version or whatever. Some of the classics
absolutely not.
probably took loads,
Yeah,
right?
and I really, really like after if I've had productions on, if I've had plays on, and I've had friends come to see them, and sometimes audience members as well, because people feel inclined to come and say hi and seek you out when you've written something. I always say to them, if you didn't like it, that's fine, but just tell me why you didn't like it. So people can be as disparaging about it as they like, as long as I know why. Because then you learn from it. And if somebody puts the effort into explaining why they didn't like it, then that's worth listening to. You know,
Right. And so the same goes for storytelling or influence or why didn't that land? What was it about it?
yeah,
And I guess again, it comes back to that. Ooh,
yeah.
what could they say? What's the kind of harshest thing anyone's ever said when you've asked that? Just out of interest. I'm intrigued now.
Um, oh, I've been called pretentious. Um, yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
and
I think all of us have.
yeah. I mean,
Anyone
it's
that's
like
willing to
it's a
do this.
badge. It's a badge of honor, really. But I mean, it was experimental. It was an experimental piece, and we had audiences of maybe 10 or 15. And I loved every time it was performed. I loved every performance of it. But it was incredibly self-indulgent. Looking back now, it was it was my experimental phase. But you need to go there really, and I
Yeah.
suppose the same applies in every walk of life. Really, you need to experiment and be brave enough to do that and expect to fail. Really,
Yeah. Fail fast, fail
yeah,
forwards, right?
yeah,
And I
absolutely, yeah,
think that goes for everything. So as we start to wrap this up, and you can give a big shout out where people can find you and listen to your
yeah, of
amazing
course.
podcast. Maybe you should change it to the Falling Asleep for Stressful People podcast. But I don't think that's a very good name for it. But so don't do that. Ignore me. Why didn't you like that, Neil? No. um,
dropping off a stress grown up.
there we go. You see, well, I
Yeah.
don't know. That could have a different connotation dropping off. So yeah, I think we'll keep it the name that it is. But just before we go there, what would be your kind of your 3 takeaways for anyone listening right now when it comes to using stories for influence? What would you tell them, like 3 golden nuggets that come from your golden mouth?
Okay, if you're telling stories, whether it be publicly or privately, keep them short,
Hmm.
um, concise, and have a beginning, a middle, and end. And I suppose to add sort of a slight bit on the end, and believe in it. When you're telling the story, believe in that story. Especially if you're telling an anecdote, relive that moment, and people will see through you reliving it. They'll be there. They'll be chased through a Roman street by an angry mob with you.
I can't wait to hear this story at some point. Definitely. And I think that's the key to, if we're talking about stories for influence, right? Keep them short, keep them concise,
Hmm.
believe in everything you're saying. And
Yeah,
actually, that's a big part of it being having influence.
yeah,
Bite chunks information that people can process and understand and agree or disagree with.
yeah,
So that's a key core of communication. But the belief behind it is what people either go, wow, I really believe in Neil,
yeah.
or am I, something not quite right, or. So I think in a way that's kind of fundamental basis to influence.
Yeah, you're establishing trust, aren't you? I think
Yeah.
that's what you're doing is establishing trust.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So, Neil, where can people find you, reach out to you, listen to you, wherever you want to be approached to?
Well, if you're interested in the short stories, if you Google short stories for stressed grown-ups, by Neil Beber, Beber, Beer. You'll find the name and everything else on the details for this show, but you'll find that. And from there, you can sort of pretty much spiral out. I mean, if you Google my name, I'm lucky enough to have quite a unique name. If you Google me, you'll find an email address, a phone number. By all means, get in touch.
Amazing. Thank you for coming on this Public Speaking Expert podcast and sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, your insights, some of your stories, your tips, and just your general bubbliness and energy. So thank you again, Neil. I look forward to interviewing you again and finding about Rome, but we'll keep that in Rome for now. So thank you a lot. And to everybody listening, remember to like, subscribe, and leave us a comment. And of course, if you do leave us a comment, I will send you a copy of one of my books. Whichever one I have in stock will be sent to you. You have to just send us a picture of it, and we will send you a copy of the book. And of course, make sure you follow us on Instagram, the Public Speaking Expert Show. And if there's any way we can help you, just reach out, just send me a message, and we will be in touch soon. Till the next episode, I will see you soon. Have a lovely rest of the day. Go out there and don't only be a great speaker, but also speak your greatness. Till the next time.